Welcome to the Mesozoic Archives, where prehistory presents history. We're your hosts, Allosaurus Capone and Pauline Pyroraptor. And today, we're going to talk about LGBTQ culture during the early 20th century.
Typically, Stonewall is thought of as the beginning of American queer culture, but that's simply not true. Stonewall may have been the beginning of the fight for queer rights, but people who identified as LGBTQ were there long before. The word queer may not be the exact term for everyone, but for this report, it's the word that's going to be used to represent the LGBTQ plus community as a whole.
Thanks to opportunities from the recent World War, Black Americans were moving into major cities. This gave them the chance to speak out and create the ideas of resistance, which was adopted by others and led to the Harlem Renaissance. This was an era of social progress, during which Black American music, art, and literature became prominent in American society. It may not be as well known, but the Harlem Renaissance was, as Henry Louis Gates said, surely as gay as it was black.
Throughout history, lovers have written letters to each other, and the Harlem Renaissance was no different. In the archive research room of the Library of Virginia, there's a collection of letters between two men we only know as Johnny and Roy, who grew up together in Norfolk. In these letters, from the spring of 1923, the couple are trying to make their long-distance relationship work. They talked about how they should just be friends and how they couldn't show affection in public without the risk of being arrested, since homosexuality was considered a crime. Letters like these show how same-sex couples would have worked at the time. Do you recognize the name Eleanor Roosevelt? Probably best known for being the First Lady and wife to FDR. Eleanor Roosevelt was an activist, humanitarian, United Nations diplomat, and much more. She was also a very close friend of American journalist Lorena Hickok. In 1978, archivists discovered 18 boxes of letters between the two women. Historian Roger Strittmatter put together and annotated 300 letters showing that they were maybe more than just friends. They discussed everything with each other, from politics and the Great Depression to manicures, medical issues, and especially Hickok's dog, Prince. They comforted each other during harsh times and supported each other's wins. Their letters were filled with affectionate terms, and they both often ended with how late it was and that they must stop writing to get some sleep.
Join us for a journey back in time to early 20th century Harlem, New York. We are going to take a stroll, starting at 108 West 136th Street. This was the home of the one and only A'Lelia Walker, whose Langston Hughes calls the joy goddess of the 20s. At a so-called Dark Tower, she hosted parties and other social gatherings, where attendees were free to express their gender and sexuality during a time of loosened cultural norms and a new spirit of sexual freedom. Having a sense of community is a big part of what it means to be a culture. In areas like Harlem, queer people can feel that community, but literary works at the time allowed that community to be felt across America. This is a poem by Langston Hughes that states that being queer is not a choice, but rather an identity. Although it wasn't public knowledge at the time, many other important authors of the Harlem Renaissance, such as Count E. Cullen and Elaine Leroy Locke, are now known to have been queer. Welcome to the happening scene of the 20s, where the bee's knees meet the cat's pajamas. Many speakeasies of the time, and especially the queer-friendly ones, were run by the mafia. When Prohibition began, those used to hiding in the shadows were able to quickly adapt to smuggling and bootleg alcohol in areas such as New York ports and harbors. The practice of homosexuality was considered a criminal offense, So Speakeasies welcomed the queer community. Since the mob was in control, they were able to promise so-called criminals protection from government officials. Ma Rainey, often called the Mother of Blues, used her rough and powerful voice to secure a record deal with Paramount. The song Prove It on Me Blues, which you just heard part of, is her basically taunting, I'm gay, but you can't prove it. The Empress of Blues, Bessie Smith, was mentored under Ma Rainey and was believed to have had a sexual or romantic relationship with her. Lucille Bogan recorded several songs under multiple record labels. The title of her song, BD Woman's Blues, is about lesbians because BD, or bulldagger, was 1920s slang for lesbians.
Starting with the stock market crash and the Great Depression, LGBTQ+ culture began to be dismissed from thought. There was an increase in the conservative mindset, so writers stopped writing about queer culture for fear they would not be published. They did not want to lose their focus on the fight for racial equality. The queer spirit of freedom never fully went away, but it was not until the Stonewall Uprising of the late 1960s that it was able to flourish publicly.
Well, that's it for today's lesson. Have a great life, and we hope to see you again soon on the Mesozoic Archives, where prehistory presents history.